Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Early Muslim Expansion. This is part 4, and I paused the last one a little bit early just because they were going to start a battle, and I didn't want to jump into I didn't want to end a minute in. So let's just shut up and let the war begin.
Are known about this battle, but we can reconstruct a version of the fight using the available sources. Muslim accounts vastly exaggerate the number of Roman troops they faced, and it is likely even that the weakened Byzantine...
I would say most victors of war, is that the term? Winners? They might overinflate their enemies' numbers, underinflate theirs. I think that's a common thing. To the winner goes the spoils, right? Winners write the history.
Forces in Syria, 10,000 strong and commanded by Wardan and Theodore, were outnumbered by the 15,000 Muslims. Both armies formed up in extended lines, with their camps to the rear, and both sides stood ready with 3 divisions of infantry, right, left and centre, while each wing had a cavalry flank guard. Behind the Muslim centre was a small reserve, and in front of their centre was a small group of champions. Before the battle began, a Christian bishop rode over to Khalid's army and attempted to negotiate a Muslim withdrawal. However, the Rashidun general simply responded by offering the traditional choice: conversion to Islam, payment of the jizya tax, or death in battle. The fighting at Ajnadayn began when the Byzantine auxiliary missile units, stationed ahead of the main line, began to rain arrows and stones on their adversaries. As the superior Byzantine ranged units loosed, the Muslims suffered losses and were unable to respond. However, one Muslim warrior named Dirar, heavily armoured and brandishing a heavy shield, stolen from a Roman soldier, marched directly into the arrow fire, shouting his war cry. After the hail of missiles ceased, Dirar and his entourage of fellow champions were met by their Byzantine counterparts, and it is said the Muslims got the better of the fighting, slaying several Roman elite warriors and 2 generals. As the dueling came to an end, the Rashidun army attacked, and the subsequent fighting was a slogging match with little manoeuvre, and lasted until nightfall. The next day, Byzantine commander Wardan attempted to lure Khalid into a trap by offering a parley, but the plan went wrong and he was instead killed by the fearsome Dirar.
Ooh.
Aiming to exploit the confusion which this loss of leadership caused in the Roman ranks, the Arabs attacked again, with their flanks in front and centre behind. After savage hand-to-hand fighting, which exhausted and depleted both armies, Khalid deployed his 4,000-strong reserve in the centre and drove deep wedges through the Roman formations in this area. Unable to withstand the pressure any further, their line collapsed. After this defeat, Emperor Heraclius sent his brother Theodore back to Constantinople in disgrace. At the same time, the remnants of his shattered army, in addition to the local Roman population, withdrew to the apparent safety of the walled cities, which subsequently became crowded with refugees. Perhaps an omen of things to come, Heraclius then retreated with his headquarters further north to the city of Antioch, due to the fact that Muslim forces now controlled the countryside and were expected to advance on the most prominent urban centre in the area. A week after their victory at Ajnadayn, the Arab forces began to march north in the direction of Damascus. On their way, they had to leave a mounted detachment at the city of Fal, ancient Pella, to keep the Roman garrison there tied down while the main army marched onward. After this was done, the Muslims reached Yakusa on the southern bank of the Yarmouk river. Here they were opposed by a blocking force of Byzantine troops on the northern shore. They were in no real position to offer serious permanent resistance, but they were there to delay the invaders and to allow the great city to further prepare for a coming siege. After a short battle here, and another battle against 12,000 Romans at the Yellow Meadow, otherwise known as Marj, the road was clear to Damascus. When the invading Arabs neared the city, the Muslim commander realized that his forces were not numerous enough to encircle it entirely. Instead, each of the Muslim sub-commanders stationed their contingents outside of the city's various gates, fully...
Damascus, that's Syria, right? Right?
blockading the crucial thoroughfares by August 21st with a total of around 20,000 soldiers, 16,000 infantry and 4,000 mobile guard cavalry. Damascus immediately began starving due to the lack of supplies and unpreparedness for a siege, while the Muslims were well supplied due to their domination of the fertile and productive local countryside. As the swift Arab light horsemen were relatively useless in a siege, Khalid ibn al-Walid sent a few hundred of them to the Eagle's Pass to the north in order to act as scouts. Here they watched for any Byzantine relief force aiming to pass through this choke point. The other half stayed near the city as a reserve, ready to help repel any sortie made by the Romans. In Antioch, the Roman Emperor learned of the siege and sent a 12,000-strong relief force, along with plentiful supplies, to help Damascus on September 9th. When this force reached the narrow pass where the Muslim scouts were stationed, they pushed the cavalry back. One of these scouts managed to send notice to al-Walid, and he, gambling that repelling the relief attempt was more important than maintaining too tight a blockade, took the remaining cavalry at night to the Eagle Pass, where he managed to rout the Romans. Despite their apparent success, the besieging Arab forces were now stretched thin by Khalid's withdrawal. Historians believe that if the
I'm laughing because withdrawal.
Garrison's general Thomas had chosen to launch a sortie at this point, the Byzantines could have broken the siege, but they did not and therefore lost the opportunity. It seems that al-Walid realized he had put the siege in danger with his gamble, and he hurriedly returned to Damascus after he attained victory at the Eagle's Pass. As the garrison and Thomas realized that no relief was coming, morale among the defenders of Damascus became weaker and weaker. It was clear action would be needed. So, the Emperor's son-in-law decided to launch a counter-offensive of his own. For this first attack, Thomas decided to concentrate on one specific section of the city, drawing men together from all sectors of the city towards the Gate of Thomas, where he was faced by around 5,000 soldiers under Shurabil. After the defending soldiers gathered in the area, the Byzantine commander began his sortie by ordering his archers to rain down a constant stream of arrows against their enemy, to which the Arabs responded accordingly. Using the cover granted by the Roman missile units, the infantry rushed through the Gate of Thomas and fanned out into battle formation, with Thomas himself leading the assault. During the subsequent skirmish, it is reported that Thomas both broke through a section of the Muslim line and almost killed Shurabil, but he was then shot in the eye by the widow of a slain Arab soldier.
Oh my God.
Despite some level of success, the sortie had failed to break the siege, and the Byzantine forces retreated into the city. As they did, it is said that the injured Roman leader swore to take 1,000 eyes in return for his own. That night, another plan to break the siege was devised by the defenders.
Jesus.
As a concentrated attack on one of the gates had failed, Thomas would this time launch simultaneous strikes from 4 of the gates. 2 large forces were...
I don't think you have enough to do that. I just don't think you have enough, buddy. I'm looking at this group right here. But maybe you can fire some arrows at these guys and send a force out to here. You don't have to worry about these guys. They're not crossing the river. But if you can stymie them with arrows... Look, I'm not a military person, so people could be looking at this going, yes, stupid. That's exactly what you should do. I don't know. But I would say hit these guys with arrows and then kind of hit these guys maybe with arrows, and try to keep one group isolated, and then so hit these guys with some arrows, hit these guys with arrows, and then come through this gate and try to attack from the side, and then turn all your arrows then on them. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just making it up as I go. That's what I would do, and watch. That's what happens, and watch it be devastating for the Romans.
Gathered at the eastern gate where Khalid was in
I just play a military leader on this channel. I don't know what I'm talking about.
command, and at the Gate of Thomas, where the main attack against exhausted enemy units would be undertaken. The other forces at the Small Gate and the Qadisiyyah Gate were designed to pin their besiegers in place. As Thomas sounded the attack, a grinding battle took place at the Qadisiyyah Gate, with both sides suffering many losses. After a while of this slaughter, Abu Ubaidah and his forces at this gate managed to doggedly repulse the Byzantine assault, driving them back into the city. The situation was far more serious at the eastern gate, where the Byzantines had a larger force.
I wouldn't even
This
go there.
larger contingent of defenders managed to break the Arab infantry and drive them back, but Khalid himself then arrived with 400 elite mobile guard cavalry, and with them struck the Roman flank. This weakened the sortie irreversibly, and the defenders were slowly driven back inside the gates. Once again, however, the worst of the fighting occurred at the Gate of Thomas. Here, the Byzantine forces were led by the one-eyed Thomas himself.
Sorry, I can't move my picture, so you just have to imagine you can see it. Sorry.
And after intense fighting, there was still no weakness in the Muslim ranks. At this point, the Roman commander seems to have realized there was no point in continuing the grinding melee, and commanded a slow, steady withdrawal. All the while,
Maybe he should have focused all of his enemies on this smaller. Shoot some arrows there, send out some men here, and then maybe send another flanking unit there. And maybe that's what I would have done.
the Arab archers continually showered his men with arrows. This was the last effort by Thomas to break the Muslim siege, and it had failed with the loss of thousands of men. With this defeat, he could no longer afford any more attempts at a breakout. A Greek in Damascus, known as Jonah the Lover in Arab sources, climbed over the wall and informed Khalid that on the night of the 18th of September there would be a Christian religious ceremony which would leave the walls relatively unguarded. He supposedly betrayed his city because his marriage to his fiancée had been interrupted by the siege, and, frustrated, asked for the Muslims' help in obtaining said bride. This man soon converted to Islam, but the details are incredibly vague. Whatever the case, details of the opportunity led Khalid to borrow ladders from a local monastery and to purchase ropes in order to form an assault party. That night, a 100-strong contingent, led by the Muslim general himself, climbed the walls, dropped into the city and killed the guards at the eastern gate. Then the attackers flung open the gate and let the remainder of the Muslim forces at the eastern gate inside the city. The other Byzantine detachments stationed elsewhere were unaware of this surprising development, and instead of helping, stayed at their posts. At the same time, Khalid began to fight his way towards the center of the city. Now attempting to save the city for a final time, Thomas sent envoys to Abu Ubaidah at the western Qadisiyyah Gate, offering surrender and a payment of the Qadisiyyah in exchange for a capitulation by terms. This was given by the supposedly peace-loving Abu Ubaidah.
So he doesn't know they've raided, and he's sending him terms. Oh, wow.
However, Khalid, who had finished slaughtering his way to the center of the city, was furious that a surrender had been allowed even though the city had technically been taken by storm. Nevertheless, the many Muslim unit commanders agreed that a surrender would be honoured. Khalid reluctantly accepted this judgment.
Oh, wow.
The fall of Damascus was a shock.
I will say this. As much as Khalid, was that the name? Apologize. As much as he wanted to go through and wipe them out, to have stopped instead of continued, that says a lot for the character of someone who in that moment could have had it all, but to have allowed it, even though he didn't want it, but to have allowed it. You know, he's not a psychopath, you know, just some deranged murderer who didn't care, he was just going to do it. To have honored it even though he had no reason to. That's
for the Byzantines, as they probably thought that the Muslim attack on the region was a massive raid and not a full-on invasion. Syria and Egypt were the most important provinces of the empire, and the fall of the former would mean that the land route to the latter was cut, and it was now also vulnerable to being occupied. Emperor Heraclius couldn't allow that, so he started sending orders to the provinces in order to bring in more reinforcements to the region. Simultaneously, the political situation in the Caliphate had also changed, as Caliph Abu Bakr passed away in late August of that year, and was replaced by Umar. The new Caliph immediately started implementing administrational and military reforms, creating new administrative positions in the provinces, and changing the formation of the army from the one created on the tribal principle to a more centralized one. Immediately after his ascension, Umar sent a letter to the army relieving Khalid of his post and appointing Abu Ubaidah in his place. We don't know if this was part of the reforms, or as some sources claim, it happened due to the previous animosity between the new caliph and the general. In any case, it seems that before the messengers could reach Damascus, the 3-day peace the Muslims promised Thomas had passed, and Khalid, alongside 5,000 cavalry, guided by Jonah, started pursuing the Romans. Thomas had around 10,000 people with him, both soldiers and citizens of Damascus, but instead of finding refuge in one of the nearby towns, this group was heading towards Antioch, and that allowed the Arab cavalry to catch up to them to the south of Latakia sometime in late September. The details of
life before discovering I had sleep apnea was pretty tough. It's like you have a weighted blanket that you're dragging around on your body all day long.
It sucks.
The details of the engagement, now known as the Battle of Marj.
I'm going to go ahead and watch this engagement because I don't want to keep shorting it, but I'm going to go ahead and watch this one. But as soon as the battle's over, I'm going to pause it or end the video.
Al-Dabaj are scarce, but according to the Muslim sources, a cavalry detachment of a few hundred caught up and took position to the south of Thomas. The Romans immediately noticed them, deciding that they would be able to defeat this small group with ease. To the surprise of the Romans, as soon as the Arab cavalry and Roman infantry started fighting, another group of Khalid's horsemen appeared to the east. Although the Romans had thousands of refugees in their midst, they still outnumbered the Muslims, and a portion of their infantry formed up to face the new threat. However, a half hour after the battle was joined here, a third group of Arab cavalry started charging from the north, and the Romans barely got into a defensive formation in time to prevent it from breaking through. Thomas's situation was becoming dangerous, as the route to Damascus was now cut off, but the Romans were still fighting on an equal footing, and the battle raged on 3 sides. An hour later, Khalid himself appeared to the west with the largest part of his army and charged the Romans. Despite the fact that Thomas managed to get a few units to this front, they were swept aside almost immediately, and the Arab cavalry was now deep inside the Roman formation. Thomas was soon killed. The Roman resistance continued for some time, but was broken within an hour. Some soldiers and refugees managed to slip away to the north, but the majority of the Romans were either killed or captured. Khalid lost just a few hundred troops.
Wow.
Immediately afterwards, the Arabs headed to Damascus and reached it in early October.
I'm gonna pause that there. I thought it would be a little bit of a longer battle, but wow, Khalid getting replaced. That's I'm hoping he comes back because he seems to be really good. He's really good. I'd draft him if I was a military commander. All right, I'm gonna end this video here, and like and subscribe, or you'll be in some horrible lawnmower accident and you'll lose like 3 toes, an arm, a liver, and a testicle. Have a good day, have a good night.